My name is Cache Prescott, and I have the privilege of hanging out with two of my colleagues, my fellow Arcadians today, and have a very interesting conversation. First and foremost, let me take a moment to introduce them. First, we have Matt Worsdall here. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Cache. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And Deborah Price. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, Cache. Hello, everyone. Hi, Matt. Good to see you.
Deborah, good to see you. Loving the jacket.
Now, Deborah and Matt, I know you all have been having conversations about this particular topic that we're about to embark on. And for those of you who may not know what that topic is, we are really going to be focused on what it means to be a professional, someone in the workplace who may be dealing with sickness, illness, a chronic condition in some way, shape, or form, or may have just received information about a diagnosis. But how does that impact how professionals are showing up in the workplace? And my colleagues have had the opportunity to have conversations with each other because this is something that they are dealing with in their day-to-day lives. And so before we jump into the conversation at hand, I'm going to allow them to just share a bit more about themselves and the conditions that they are dealing with. So first and foremost, Deborah, if you wouldn't mind getting us started, please feel free to share what you would like to share.
Thanks, Cache. So out of the blue 2 years ago, I received a phone call from my GP asking me if I was sitting down, which is never a good sign, and telling me that she'd received some blood tests back from me, which showed that I had a very high inflammation marker, which didn't really make an awful lot of sense to me. I was thinking, so what's that? And she said, I don't want you to panic about it. She said, but it could be ovarian cancer. And she said, I'm going to put you on the fast track to get a scan and we'll test it. And I said, oh, okay. I said, what's the score? So she gave me the scores and I said, I'll look it up on Google. She said, please don't. She said, just wait. She said, it might be completely benign. It might be, innocent. So don't worry about it. Long story short, I got my scan 2 weeks later and found that I did indeed have a tumor on my ovary, and met the gynecologist, and she told me that I would need surgery and chemotherapy. This was in September 2020. September 2021. Said I would need surgery and chemo, and that it would all be done by Christmas. So it took me a little while to get my head around it, but that was where we were going. She then said I needed another scan, and that scan revealed that it wasn't primary in the ovary. So I went through a number of diagnostic tests over the next 6 weeks that finally discovered that actually I had appendix cancer. And the appendix had ruptured and created what they call pseudomyxoma peritoni. What a mouthful. Audrey Hepburn had it. So that's what I remember. And so basically your whole peritoneum, the whole abdomen lining and the organs within it are peppered with these mucin cells, and tumors can grow within that. And so the surgery for it is called the mother of all surgeries. It's called cytoreductive surgery in HIPEC, which I was then scheduled to have in January 2022. I had that surgery in January 2022 and was told that it had been completely successful, very long surgery, but they'd managed to get everything out. And so it was now the road to recovery. I was off work for about 4 months full-time, and then another couple of months part-time, and I went back to work full-time in September 2022. Unfortunately, I had a recurrence. So in November and December 2022, it came back. And so that was pretty shocking because I felt that the drama was behind me. But in fact, it was just beginning, because then I was told that I was inoperable and incurable. So as part of this podcast, what I want to share really is how I navigated, and Matt, when he shares his story, has been a huge support to me, as has the business, in keeping my mindset positive, staying at work and being able to work through the treatment phases. And I think there's some lessons to be learned, and about the positivity that can come from having a life-threatening diagnosis and still being A-okay.
Thank you for giving us just a bit of background about what you've been dealing with for over the past 2 years at this point. And of course, we have a lot to talk about in relation to that. Before we jump into that, Matt, I'm going to ask you to share a bit about where things are for you and what your journey has been thus far.
The first thing I didn't realize, Deborah, we've almost been in sync with our timelines. We both kind of fell off the cliff metaphorically around about the same time. So I kind of lost track of, as you do with the busyness of life, I lost track of the timelines, but we've both been kind of pedaling this journey kind of in tandem, haven't we, over the last couple of years? So it was interesting to see. So in a nutshell, it was 2021, it was April, and I was rushed into hospital. I couldn't really breathe, struggling to lay down, which sounds like a weird thing to say. This is how I was aware that something wrong was wrong. I couldn't lie back when I was trying to sleep without almost kind of convulsing and sitting up. And I thought I was having some kind of panic attack. But it turns out I actually had heart failure. And what was happening was my heart was not pumping blood sufficiently out of my heart chamber. So when I was laying down, I was effectively drowning, if you like, with blood on the inside out. So this kind of sitting up was a reflex response to try and help gravity do some of the work in terms of releasing the blood from the heart chamber. So I came in to hospital, very short breath. They did some scans. So the first thing they noticed was my heart had become very enlarged. And they were looking for reasons as to why that may have happened. And then they did some blood tests, and they saw that alongside the heart failure, at the same time, my kidneys had failed. So heart and kidney failure at the same time, back in April 2021. Now, I was aware that I had a kidney disease, which I was diagnosed with when I was very young, at Great Ormond Street Hospital here in the UK. And, they did say that by the time I was kind of 40, I'm currently 36, time I was 40, I may need to have a kidney transplant, which is where I currently am at the moment. So I'm currently on the list for heart surgery in the imminent future. So hopefully, well, I don't know when this will go out, but by the time this does go out, there may be a date set. I'm hoping it will be October of 2023, which is a couple of months away from where we are today. And then beyond that, a kidney transplant, but I can't have the kidney transplant until they've sorted out the heart. So the heart needs to have a valve replaced, which will be a mechanical valve, which will sit in the heart, and that will tick away. And apparently I'll be able to hear it, they say, at night. I'll be able to hear my new biomechanical heart ticking away. So I'll get that. And then hopefully, well, a few months later, once I've kind of recovered from that, I will then be on the list for a kidney transplant, which will be quite an intense surgery, quite interesting in terms of what they're going to be doing. They don't actually take out your old kidneys. So I'll end up having more kidneys than all of you. I'll have 3 kidneys, but 2 of which won't work, but only one working one. And that will sit at the front. So, just to touch on some of the things that Deborah said, obviously, when I went in 2 years ago, it was slightly different to Deborah's journey insofar as there was this big panic moment when I first went in. They kind of recognized what has happened. They were able to give me some relatively effective medication for the heart. So the heart got sorted out relatively quickly. And I think today's podcast is also about honesty and being transparent. Otherwise, what's the point? And it's not helpful to other people if we're not going to be honest. So, there were things in my life that I was doing that weren't particularly helpful and conducive to being healthy. So smoking, drinking, in my past, dabbling with kind of anabolic steroids and things in the gym, things like that, which are not good for you. And I say that now, somebody who's come out the other side of that, and I warn against anyone young and who's getting into the gym and training. My background before this was in fitness, personal training, and it can be a very, very seductive and narcissistic thing to get into, is this kind of bodybuilding and steroids and this kind of focus on self, and it doesn't always lead to a good place. So there's definitely a level of personal responsibility that I have to take for some of it. Obviously the kidney disease was underlying. However, certain lifestyle choices with a kidney disease were probably unwise, to say the least. So I did have a moment of kind of waking up, I guess. That's the purpose of me telling you all of this. a kind of moment of waking up 2 years ago when I had to seriously evaluate the way I was living, and things did improve. Things did improve, certainly from a cardio perspective, cardiac perspective with the heart. Things got a lot better. And then, obviously the kidney disease had already kind of taken hold. So what they're doing with my heart is kind of really in preparation for the kidney. The heart in itself, if I didn't need to have a kidney transplant, people do have valves that leak, and it's not always necessarily a massive problem. But in order for me to be resilient and strong enough to survive the kidney transplant, they need to fix the heart first. So I had a moment of probably about 18 months where I kind of felt really, really good again. And I'd kind of, certainly from a cardiac perspective, I was doing a lot more cardiovascular exercise. I got really into swimming, and all of that was helping. But unfortunately, that's not enough to fix a leaky valve. So it's kind of a separate thing. Heart failure was more caused by, I think, by lifestyle, to be honest. But then, there was a valve in there that was problematic anyway. So I then, came back. Obviously, I was being monitored, and we can talk about this, Deborah, and there are endless amounts of blood tests every week. There's a bloody letter coming through the door reminding you you've got this and that,
Yeah.
and your whole schedule gets peppered with these appointments, which is good. I guess they keep an eye on you. And in October 2022, after having a spout of flu, I did some blood tests which were really, really alarming. And they said, look, you're kind of running out of runway here. So anyway, I had a couple of surgeries at the beginning of the year on my arm, which were to enable me to have dialysis. So as of March 2023, I started dialysis, which is 3 times a week at the hospital for 3 hours, 3.5 hours of time. So managing that, and I guess we'll walk through that later, but managing that as a kind of imposition on your time and freedom, it has been somewhat challenging. So yeah, I think that's probably enough in terms of a potted history, but I'm sure we can get into some of the detail as we move forward.
Just listening to both of your stories, or just kind of the background details, and I have a certain level of knowledge, but this really just goes to show one of the reasons why this is such an important conversation, because you just never know what people are dealing with behind the scenes. When we are connecting over Zoom, or, if we're in a face-to-face gathering, and, in those moments where we're together, I don't know all of these details. And so I wanted to ask you both why you thought this was such an important conversation, because you mentioned that you all have been supporting each other behind the scenes and having these conversations, because I assume this is a safe space, someone that gets it, someone that understands it. But as I mentioned a few months ago, Deborah and I were talking, and she brought this idea to me after you all had discussed it and decided that you were willing to share. So why do you think that this is such an important conversation to have, in particular for the companies that have team members that may be in their own journeys when it comes to some type of condition or illness?
Thanks, Cachet. I think for me, obviously, it's life-changing when you get a diagnosis like this, and your world is utterly rocked to your core. And there are times when you feel all at sea and completely lost and frightened. And there are other times when I have felt jubilant, and I'm living my best life. There's a sweetness, funnily enough, that comes from it, because your life is not forever. The lack of infiniteness of your living makes you treasure things so much more. But in the times that since I've got my diagnosis and the different aspects that I've been through, it's been good to have Matt at the end of Teams. Generally, we'll pick up the call and suddenly go, how are you really doing? Because you're aware, I think, at times of being as honest as you can be, but and sometimes I can be brutally honest, and I can have any conversation anybody might want to ask about. And sometimes the protective layer comes in. And I couldn't. I mean, I found that I think about 6 weeks into my diagnosis, I didn't want anyone else to ask me how I was. And as much as well-meaning as it was, that email saying, how are you doing, whatever, I was trying to deal with my own emotions. I was trying to manage my kids and my family. I didn't have any answers. The uncertainty was just overwhelming. And yet Matt was going through something similar. So it was a safe space away from my family and my loved ones where I could go, Matt, how are you dealing with this? Matt, and we have had over the last 2 years some incredibly moving and touching conversations where I certainly have felt that I was able to unpick my own mindset, what's going on for me. So we'll probably again talk about some of the themes of, am I in denial? When I'm in positive mode, is it because I'm actually in denial? Or is that part of my belief system? What's going on? And sometimes I felt incredibly lonely. Sometimes I've just thought, fuck it, sorry.
We'll
I've just thought, the doctors are wrong. Whenever I would go for a medical examination or a test or something, I'd say to him, you've got someone else's file. I feel fine. And again, Matt was a great resource to kind of go, oh, it's just weird. You feel like you're living two different realities. This, I feel okay. They're telling me I'm not, what if they've got it wrong? And so it was just another sense of reality that I could share with him. And how are you managing this, scattered dissension of appointments in your diary? And how the hell am I going to hold down my job? How am I going to meet my financial needs through this period of stress and change and, your health? And then I'd have other people yelling at me, Deborah, you've got to make your health number one. You're going, yes, I understand that. And I want to do that. But I've still got the realities of paying my bills. And also, who am I? Am I a sick person all the time? Or am I a sick person some of the time and I'm getting better? Or am I the normal Deborah who works with the team and does things? So Matt has been an incredible anchor for me throughout this whole period of a safe space, as I say, away from my family who were also struggling to come to terms with the uncertainty, etc. And we could excavate emotions and feelings and mindset together, which has been massively invaluable. So this podcast for me was around, I would love us to be able to capture some of the poignant moments and the goosebumpy moments where you kind of get an aha moment for yourself, or you hear the other person and kind of go, wow, that was profound. And that's what I hope we'll be able to share, to give people hope and to it's not a dead end when you get a horrible diagnosis. There's a lot of joy in it as well. Well, there can be.
There's so much in that, Deborah. Just like when you were talking, there were so many moments that I remember from us speaking, and then also moments, the kind of things you do on your own. And I guess a couple of things to refer back to Kesh's question about why is this important. I think it's important on so many levels. Right? I think it's important for us as individuals to be able to have a conversation like this if we choose to. And obviously, I accept that for some people, this is not an appropriate way of dealing with it, and some people don't want to be open, and that's fine. There's a level of benefit, I think, to our direct company, Arcadia, and the individuals within it, and creating that culture of trust and openness that we pride. And I think it's good as a place to work that we can have this conversation and kind of not feel frightened or ashamed or too proud to have it or say we need help or whatever. And also, I think given the work we do, there's a level of role modeling this kind of thing for, I think, our clients. Within all the organizations we work with who are far bigger than ours, inevitably, just on a pure law of averages, there will be people in those organizations who are struggling with things, as bad, if not worse, if not as bad. But people will be having their own health struggles. It is inevitable. And I think raising some awareness around that topic, not with necessarily any agenda, I think just opening up the topic so people can talk about it and hopefully get to a place of resolution, of hope, of honesty, or whatever it might be. I think it's a healthy conversation to have. I just also wanted to kind of talk about, especially in relation to our business, one of the things as well, which has been I've really struggled with, is this kind of conflict between resilience and resourcefulness, you know, and these are two words that we use a lot in our work, right? In all our mindset programs, we talk about resilience, talk about being resourceful, you know, digging deep, pushing on, all of this kind of language. And sometimes, you know, to me, I felt like I'm in a kind of a Rocky montage, you know, like, come on, you know, and I think one of the big things for me is learning that is not always helpful. You know, this kind of sense that you have to be okay, and that you have to be strong, you have to be, and actually sometimes there is a level of delusion that sometimes the best and most resourceful things, so resilience and resourcefulness, sometimes we see these two things as, you know, the same, but actually they can be sometimes in conflict. Sometimes the most resourceful thing to do is accept that you need some help, accept that maybe things aren't going so well, and by doing that, the ironic, the kind of flip is that in a way that does make you more resilient. So resilience isn't always a solo sport, you know, it can be and it should be a team sport. And certainly our conversations, Deborah, have made me feel better, you know, and, you know, it's been really helpful. And I would encourage people to talk with people if they can, who they trust, you know, not with any agenda other than just to talk and get stuff off your chest. And I guess just one other thing is it's just around perspective and identity, and who am I? You know, who am I with this illness? And I still don't really have an answer to that. You know, I think I'm still kind of figuring that out. But one thing I do know is my perspective of what matters. You know, touching on some of the things you said there, Deborah, about, you know, what gives you joy in life now, and where will you spend your time, and where will you give your energy. I guess you become more discerning when you're in this situation. And, you know, you don't sweat the small stuff so much. You value the good stuff a lot more. And you know, when I was told about this, so it was kind of weird. Again, it was one of this kind of resilient fallacies, I guess, in my brain, which was when I was told about this concept of dialysis. It was absolutely my mission that I would resist it at all costs. I am not going on, you know, and I was like, and if I somehow succumb to that, then somehow I'd failed. You know, I look back at that now and I think, what a bloody stupid attitude that was. Now I'm in dialysis. It has its downsides, obviously, mainly the time element. And also it took me a good few months to actually feel better from the treatment. I spent most part of earlier 2023, well, from March to about June time, feeling horrendous. And that was really difficult. But now it's kind of, how do I almost collaborate with the treatment, and, you know, what can I do to make that treatment as most effective as possible, and how can I structure my life around it, and actually structure the treatment around my life, actually, is probably a better way of phrasing it. And you do find that as bad as the horizon seems, you know, dialysis or heart surgery or whatever it might be, when you get there, you can find ways to manage. And I think that does come from people like you, Deborah, and the relationships we've had, is when you're in the dark place, there are things you can do. And it's not, I don't know, this may sound flippant, it doesn't have to be as bad as you think it's going to be. And you can find a way to drastically make it more, be able to endure it a lot better than perhaps you would think, because things seem so scary when they're in the distance and you're hurtling down this road of treatment and surgery and all of this stuff. And it's sometimes you feel so out of control. You know, you've been dragged through, you know, it sounds in a way ungrateful, dragged through the healthcare system like it's a bad thing. I know there's a lot of people in the world who would love that, to be dragged through the healthcare system. But, you know, we are in some ways lucky that we are dragged through the healthcare system in the way that we are over here. But it still doesn't mean it's not bloody frightening at times, and you just feel you're out of control. You're on the roller coaster and it's set off, and you can't really get off it, you know. And you know, and that's it. You're in. So strap in, and kind of get on with it, I guess, is how it feels.
Matt, you brought up one thing that I would like for us to explore a little bit more: the idea of identity. And you said you know, you're in a place and space where you're still trying to kind of figure that out. But I want to ask you both, and Deborah, you can get us started. when it comes to identity, how did diagnosis impact your identity?
Interesting question, Cachet, and one I struggled with for a long time. I guess there've been phases, so and there've been aspects to it. So there's the identity of being a sick person, and like I say, I fought that really hard because I didn't feel sick. I didn't feel unwell at all. So I was convinced the doctors had definitely got it wrong. And I think I really challenged my partner quite a lot in the early days. And I think that I misrepresented my diagnosis to my kids unwittingly in the early stages, because I wanted to minimize it because I felt that that was a true representation of what was going on for me, because that's how I felt. But I think it was unfair. And so about 6 weeks in, there was a moment of kind of acceptance, I guess, go through the change curve. There was a point of acceptance of going, okay, so I've got this diagnosis and these are the implications, as opposed to they've got it wrong. And there was a real moment when that shifted. And that was a very dark moment for me as well. That was one of my delusion moments, and kind of going, have I got it all wrong? And I think it's healthy to be delusional. I think it's healthy to hold on to your own belief system. So whilst the medical system is really valuable and useful, and like Matt says, I'm very grateful for everything they have done for me, they also have a particular mindset that I don't necessarily ascribe to. So in tandem with doing conventional treatment, I have been doing a lot of alternative treatments. And I'm very lucky, I think, that I have found medics who are prepared to work with me in tandem. And for me, my own personal journey has been being able to marry the two. So not rejecting conventional medicine, but also not accepting it wholeheartedly, believing that my journey is my unique journey. And there will be certain things that will work for me. And maybe because I believe so strongly in them, there might not be scientific evidence on that, but I need to hold on to that. So in terms of identity, sick person, healthy person, all my life, I was a single mum for a lot of time, bringing my kids up. And for me, being physically strong and healthy was what got me through. It's how I survived. So the fear of that being taken away, both on a physical level, but also a financial level, was devastating. And I think I underestimated that at times. I look back now and I had a time, like a lot of people, I guess, in 2008, 2009, with the global financial crisis, where I also hit the skids financially and thinking that my whole world was going to collapse, and it didn't. In fact, again, one of the happiest times of my life, when I didn't have as much money, I didn't have access to credit and things like that. I lived a very simple life. And again, I got used to these things that were at my fingertips and were just very immediate. So life was very much more simple. And again, this health scare did the same. Like Matt says, you sweep away those things that aren't important, the people that you don't need to spend your time with, that you might have given a bit of airtime to, etc. You're very particular about, if I've got limited time, who do I want to spend it with? Where do I want to spend it? And how do I want to spend it? And it's really simple, makes life really straightforward. So in terms of identity, there was that personal level. There was also the identity of, my role at Arcadia has been a delivery consultant. So I was doing pre-COVID face-to-face deliveries. Post-COVID, I was doing virtual deliveries. And all of that got taken away. Arcadia had to make the decision, and they made it overnight in January, that they were going to take me off deliveries because I was a risk. Because I didn't know if I was going to be well enough. I was just about to embark on chemotherapy. I didn't know if I was going to be well enough on a day-to-day basis to show up to the bookings with clients that I had been put in my diary. So of course that was a terrible mess for the project managers to try and unravel and put someone else in, etc. And whilst Arcadia tried to accommodate me for as long as they could, they did at some point have to make that decision and say, right, Deborah, from today, and that decision's been made, you're no longer doing that. What Arcadia did was they created a new role for me. And I'm eternally grateful. I think I'm doing my best role ever now. And that's due to the flexibility of Arcadia, through the human connection that we have as Arcadians, is the person first and work second, with a commercial lens on things. But, I've been given a role that I think is absolutely written for me, and that's perfect. But when that was presented to me in January, I spent 6 weeks in a very dark place because I didn't I didn't know who I was anymore. So I didn't know if I would ever get back to being that delivery consultant that I'd spent 20 years doing. And that felt, combined with the medical diagnosis that I was inoperable and incurable, it felt like a dead end. It felt like I was waiting to die. And I came through that, and after 6 weeks, intellectually I could appreciate what Arcadia was doing was a good thing, but I didn't feel it. I didn't embrace it for a good 6 weeks. So that was a tricky time. And Arcadia again gave me breathing space and let me catch up with myself. So those have been my two experiences, on a professional level and on a personal level. Who am I?
Thank you for sharing that, Deborah. And Matt, for you, what has this whole identity thing kind of conjured up for you?
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of what Deborah said. I think for me, it does create almost like this, I don't know, it's almost like, I don't know if bipolar is the right word, but I feel like there's two versions of who I am now. And you have to kind of negotiate those two conflicting identities between each other. And they are opposing. And it's managing that, being the patient versus being, what's my, up until being poorly, I guess part of the reason I am in the situation I'm in is because I had probably some nihilistic, hedonistic belief in my 20s, and that I was indestructible. And that probably accounted for a lot of the things I used to get up to, which were, unhelpful. It's probably the soft way of putting it. And did contribute on some level to where I am now. So that in essence, I still feel indestructible, and I know I'm not, but I still have this kind of desire to be strong and to, this isn't going to beat me. And then I have other moments, and I think they were kind of, that's what you said, when I'm in the hospital, and I'm on the machine, the dialysis machine, I've got 2 needles in my arm, and I'm the youngest person in there, probably by about 30 years. And literally, I recently went away on holiday, and I came back from holiday, and 2 of the older gentlemen in there had died in the 3 weeks that I was on holiday. And I think, am I that? And I just don't realize. Because I'm on the same treatment. They're in having dialysis 3 times a week. They are probably got other things going on as well. So it's not purely about the kidneys necessarily. But I do. There are those moments where I think it's like mathematically, like 1 = 0. It doesn't work. Like how am I that? Like when I'm in here now, and how can I have that as well? And how do I manage these 2 things, and they are in complete conflict, and sometimes, to the point where sometimes I even forget, like opportunities will come up with work. And last year, so 2022, before October, I did a lot of travel. I was out in New York, I was out in Saudi, I went to Munich, I'd been to Hong Kong, and that's part of the job I really enjoyed, was traveling around, meeting clients and running programs, not just in London, but around the world. And, even now things will come up, like, oh yeah, I'll do that. And I forget. It's like, you can't really, unless you want to go to New York and find a dialysis clinic and pay for it. And, a lot of the time you're going to be in dialysis. So, from a commercial point of view, does it even make sense for you to go there? Because if it does, you're going to spend probably, 10 hours. If I was in New York for I don't know, say 6 days, I'd spend 10 hours of that time in dialysis. So, and that's 3 sessions. That's, about $600. I did look into it, of course, because every part of me is like, I want to do it. And then you make the call and go, you can't. And those words, I think for me, from a trigger of, you can't do this. When people say to me, and there's certain things that come with being a kidney patient. Diet is one of them. So I have to have quite a low potassium diet. And also at the moment, because my kidneys aren't working, I'm on a fluid restriction. which means I can only have, say, around about 1 litre of fluid, and that includes any fluid. So whether that's beer or water or whatever, or vodka, I can do 1 litre a day. So obviously I try and make as much of that alcohol at the weekends if I can. But there's that fluid is set. And when I hear people, friends, family, when I went to see my parents, that when they say you can't have that, whether that's food or if I'm eating something which is a slightly outside the tram lines of what I'm supposed to be eating, you can't have that, or you can't drink that. That language of you can't really, more than anything gets under. And even though I know it may be true, I don't want to hear it. And I think in that moment when I'm trying to be normal, I don't want to hear reminders that I'm poorly. And I think, when I'm in the hospital and the doctors are saying, right, you've got to do this, I can kind of deal with it. But when I'm trying to be me as I used to understand me, I find that really, really challenging. So I think for me, when it comes to identity, it's the balance of these two. And I think the other thing, both are really important. And it's finding the balance between the two. So it is important, it goes back to what we said at the beginning about resilience versus resourcefulness. I think that resilience, I'm okay, I'm going to crack on, I think definitely is useful and has a place. But as does okay, I'm not well and I need to start being a lot more responsible and allowing myself to be vulnerable and to be helped and supported, and to accept that I need to endure some limitation in my freedom in a really fundamental sense, in the time I have each week, where I can go, because obviously the dialysis is at a certain place near me. So it means even going away for a weekend now is very, very difficult. It requires a lot of faffing around, and Deborah knows as well from her experiences that, the NHS, as brilliant as it is, it's an archaic system. So you can't just kind of log on and go onto an online portal and switch your appointment, or manage your dialysis schedule independently from your home like you would do with other things. You've got to call the hospital, and you can leave a voicemail, and then it's a real faff. So there's definitely restriction on what I can do. And for somebody in the past who's been quite hedonistic and doesn't like to be told what I can and can't do, I think that's been really tough.
What both of you just shared, there is this, and we talked about this a little bit before as we were prepping for our conversation, this coexistence between wellness and sickness that you are battling on the daily basis. And so let's talk a little bit about the role that mindset plays in that dynamic. Of course, this is the mindset advantage. And Matt, you mentioned the ideas of, of resilience and what role that plays here. But what are some other aspects of the mindset piece that have really been part of this journey for you both? And Matt, I will let you go ahead and get us kicked off with that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the resilience, I think one of the things that stands out, and this came from, I think you introduced this, Deborah, to the company, was this idea of the Stockdale paradox, which is in a way, I guess, is a strategy in some ways for managing those two competing identities of being a sick person who needs help versus a strong person who needs to be okay. And I guess those are the two conflicting identities. And I guess you have to, it's hard to explain. I guess in terms of the mindset element, it's you need a strategy to get you through the day to day. And those strategies may vary, and that might just be, doing something each day that makes you feel grateful. Like, I know it sounds silly, but even like on days, and again, like your perception of what you appreciate and what you won't and will not tolerate, God, it changes so much. Like, I walked out the house this morning. We've just had a bank holiday here in the UK, and walked down to the shop to get some milk and some stuff. And I had dialysis last night, and the sun, it's gone a bit grey here now. Obviously, it's the UK, so it's clouded over. But it was quite nice earlier, and I felt really happy that A, I don't have dialysis today, and B, that I could walk down to the shops and back, and I wasn't out of breath. and those two things made me feel pretty good. And the sun was shining. And you do have to have those moments of gratitude. And I do think that is part of the trick. And that's not to say that the bad times aren't bad, because they are, but you need something to take the edge off, you know, and if you don't have something that takes the edge off, you will become so resentful. I mean, I remember when I first kind of got into this situation, and so much was happening to my body that I didn't understand. So I mentioned there about being out of breath. I mean, I didn't really understand that, but obviously now I do understand it, and because I can understand it, I can manage it. And the reason as a dialysis patient or kidney patient you become out of breath is because your body struggles to get the fluid off you, right? Hence why I'm on a fluid restriction. So if I drink too much of anything, the fluid starts to collect in my body. And before too long, it starts collecting in my lungs. And when it starts collecting in my lungs, I literally swell up and I wouldn't be able to walk from, well, 50 yards down the road. Obviously, I don't let it get to that point now because I understand what my target weight should be. So I have a weight which I should be. The dialysis then takes fluid off me. But it took me 3 months to really understand what was going on. And that for me to be kind of feel well like I do now, I have to be around about 89 or 90 kilos. When I go past 93, that's not good. That took me a long time to figure that. That's a lot of calibration, a lot of weighing myself at the hospital, a lot of dialysis treatments where they had to figure out exactly how much water to take off me. It all sounds really complicated, but the point about the resentment was there was a time where I wasn't even coming into the office because there's a hill just by the office. It's not a big, I say a hill, it's in central London. So as hilly as it gets in central London, which isn't very hilly. It's like a gradient of like that, which is about 100 meters. For those of you in London, from Farringdon up to kind of Chancery Lane, there's a bit of an incline. I'm not going to call it a hill. I'm going to call it an incline because that's all it is. In my mind, it's bloody Everest, but it is just an incline. And I couldn't get up there. You know, there was a team day we had, and I came up and I had to leave because I couldn't walk up that hill. And that makes you so resentful, or can make you feel so resentful when you see other people going about their daily business. Like, all I want to do is walk up the road and I can't. I just want to walk around London and do a day, like, you know, go shopping. But even walking around is too difficult. And I start thinking about my journey and how do I get from here to here without having to walk more than, you know, and that level of it can create a really dark shadow in you, and you make you very hateful of other people. You see other people living their life, and it can make you really resentful. And I think, you know, the only antidote to that is gratitude for the things that you do have. And actually, you know, this whole process of going through this has definitely given me a perspective where, you know, I think we take a lot for granted in this culture. And actually, I think we have it. You know, if I was this sick in probably 80% of the areas in the world, you know, I would not be receiving the treatment I'm receiving. And, you know, there is an endpoint for this, hopefully for me, which will allow me to live a more normal life. Minded that I'll always be on the list as a renal patient, but there will be hopefully an endpoint where post surgeries I can go back to more normality, and I'm very grateful for that. So I think you've got to be grateful at the big picture level, but also each day try and find a few things that make you happy. And, you know, and I think talking about mindset, that's not mindset through the lens of Arcadia and content. That's mindset through the lens of just living a normal life day to day. And that's not corporate advice. That's just personal advice. Is just look for things that you can make yourself feel good. So I think without that, you can get yourself into a very dark and, you know, resentful place, which is not good for anybody, you or the people around you who love and care about you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can underestimate. I don't think we do underestimate it, really. I think we all know it. But you know, when you're living through something like this, you get a different appreciation of it. And I'm, you know, 2 years in now, and interestingly, a friend of mine got diagnosed with colon cancer last week, and she's asked for a call, and somebody I know through a Facebook support group for the particular type of cancer that I've got has been asking advice on chemotherapy, and in giving them advice, it's been really interesting. I feel like I'm the fly on the wall because I'm telling them about my story and kind of going, wow, did I go through that? Wow, is that how I handled it? And I'm really proud. And I think, Matt, again, this is something that we both share, is that there is a pride in appreciating the journey that we've been on, and the fact that you hone in on the bits that work. And it's not minimizing the dark days. Like Matt says, there are horrible days, there's no question about it. My son challenged me a couple of months ago, and he said, Mum, you tend to minimize those dark days. And I stopped and reflected on it, because, if I'm on a good day, then, I'll talk to people about the fact, I'm feeling great today, etc. But they don't see, because I'm not visible on the days when I'm having a shit day, when when I can't get out of bed, when I've had to go to bed, or I'm wrapped around the toilet because I'm vomiting, or, there are horrible days. But I compartmentalize them, I think, is what I do. And I didn't think about what I was doing, but that's what I do. So they don't catastrophize. They don't make my whole life crap. They are a part of what I'm living with, but they're not everything. And I naturally, I think, amplify the good days. When I'm feeling good, I go out and bloody enjoy it. So that fills me up, and that sustains me through the crappy days. This year I've been in A&E, accident and emergency, every month. Every 4 weeks, I was admitted for 2 or 3 days for uncontrollable vomiting and not being able to keep any food down. And I had a gastro NG tube, it's called. They stick it down your nose into your stomach. It's horrible. It's absolutely foul. And it always happens on a Friday night, and I lose my weekend, and then it's Monday and I'm back to work, and I go, damn it, here we go again. But it's, that hasn't happened now for 6 weeks. So I've now, through my alternative therapies, I found ways of managing that, so that's not happening. So that's joyous, and those are the bits that it's like a fire. Those are the embers that I fan those flames, those embers of the good stuff. I've moved to the seaside, and whenever it's sunny enough and the water's a little bit warmer, I go and I swim in the sea, because it makes me feel alive. And I take every possible moment to enjoy things. This weekend, I cycled to Dymchurch, which is around, it took us about an hour and a half to cycle there. And I went on the Dodgems. I'd been there with my granddaughter a month ago, and I was thinking, I want to go back and I want to be on the Dodgems. So there's so much to be joyful about. And that does carry you through. So I think, just making sure that your magnifying glass is well calibrated, and choose the things to really focus in on, and that bring you joy and that you share with other people. And there are also moments, as Matt alluded to, with, in terms of your resilience, there are times when you just need to shut the doors down, and you need to go, I don't have time to tell anybody how I'm feeling, or they don't need to know this bit. That's fine. I'll deal with that on my own. My partner's never far from my side. And of course, that's hugely important. And I can cope with that. And when I'm feeling good, I don't want to talk about the crap days. I just want to talk about the good days. And that's why being at work, being at Arcadia, being with the team is so important, because that reminds me I'm still alive. I'm still who I am. I'm still able to engage with life, and I'm not thinking about death. And one other thing that I've been really amazed about in myself is I have absolutely zero, and I mean zero, fear of dying. And I always thought, all my life, I've thought that I would be petrified, and I have zero. I just feel a level of acceptance. It doesn't mean I want to die at all, but I don't have a fear of that. And I did obsess about December, when I got the news that I'd got the recurrence, with trying to make life as pleasant as possible for my kids and those that I would leave behind. So I planned my funeral. I got them all organized with photographs that I'd like them to have of me, and songs I'd like them to play, and all. So it was pretty morbid, and I think it was hard for them, but actually it was very cathartic for me. So it's kind of like I confronted the possibility that I was going to die, and I had no trajectory. The medics couldn't tell me. It could have been anything from weeks to months. They didn't like to tell me. Their normal window is 3 to 5 years. But in December, I didn't even know if I was going to make it to the summer, and here I am. and I'm happier, I'm more healthy, and I'm feeling great. Got the, all my treatments have got my disease under control. And I believe that there's a malfunction in my system that I'm addressing. And I truly believe that there's a possibility, and I'm going to hang on to that possibility, that I can overcome that. And if I'm wrong, who gives a damn? I've still lived my life with that hope, that beacon of light for me that just makes every day worth living.
Well, and you did everything within you took back control out of the situation. Yeah. You lived and you did what you could to live the best and most productive life.
Deborah and Matt, thanks for your thoughts on the mindset piece, because as you both mentioned, it's such an important part of this journey. And you all have been so open and transparent with your journeys and how you approach it. But we've also had conversations about the fact that this isn't necessarily the same for every single person that may be going through something, that may be dealing with sickness or illness in the workplace. And so you both had some thoughts on this idea of what it might look like for other people that have their own respective journeys. So Deborah, would you be willing to speak to that a little bit?
Sure, Kashay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think even though at this point in time, and I'm 2 years in, I do feel okay about talking about it. I mean, I did think about, after I first mentioned it to you, thinking, what am I doing? It's still my precious baby. There are still some people and some times when I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to expose it. But right here, right now, this feels good for me. And I think my advice to anyone going through this is be true to yourself. If you want to talk, then make sure you've got avenues where you can go and speak to the right people who are going to be good for you. And sometimes it's your family, your nearest and dearest. Sometimes it's anybody but your nearest and dearest. It might be, we've got an employee assistance program. I tapped into that at one point. And sometimes you don't want to talk to anybody about anything. You don't even want to acknowledge that it exists. You just want to live your normal life without this. This is a side show. This is not the main event necessarily. And so I think trust yourself to know what's right for you at any point in time. And I might, next month decide I just don't want to talk about it again. That's one of the dangers of this, is that, what's the invitation to anyone who's listening to this? Is it, contact me and we talk? Actually, that is not the invitation. What I'm signing up to is sharing this recording. That doesn't mean that I'm a free-for-all for anybody who wants to ask me questions about it or delve into it. So you always maintain that protective barrier, I think, and make it clear to people, if it's okay to talk now, or I'd rather not talk about it.
And Matt, I know you had some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think you have to set your own rules, I think, with it, and that's not necessarily. It helps you, I think, because it gives you a sense of control over the situation, which, when you're poorly, I think one of the things you yearn for is some control over something which ultimately is reasonably far out of your control. So to that extent, it's the classic, control the controllables type of stuff that we're all very familiar with in the work we do. But I think, it also helps other people, in terms of other people, and allowing them to know how to deal with you. And I mean that in the nicest possible sense, because if you don't set some parameters, or you don't, help people understand just a little bit of where you're at, I think that can also become almost kind of damaging and slightly contagious. People talking about what's going on, and are they, and you create this kind of enigma or this mystery around it, and actually that can alienate you. And then people don't want to talk to you because, how much am I supposed to know? How much should I know? Or I probably shouldn't. I'm not going to call Matt because I might not be allowed to know this. So I think you have to set your stall out, but you need to provide the version of what is going on that you're comfortable with, and be comfortable enough to kind of do that. Now that's, the extent to which you do that, I think, is entirely up to you. And some people don't like to overshare or go too much into the detail. obviously Deborah and I, we're quite open in our personalities, so we've kind of, you know, opened up quite a bit today in terms of some of the detail that maybe other people wouldn't want to do, and I think that's absolutely right for some people not to want to do that. But I do think, you know, setting out some parameters around kind of where you're at, and you know, I'm happy to talk about this bit, but you know, I don't want to necessarily go into too much detail, or saying to people, you know, if there's anything you want to know, please just ask me. And obviously that doesn't apply to everyone. To your point, Deborah, it's not an invitation to open up to everybody to start. But you know, people who are in your certain circle, please just ask me. Please don't assume, and please don't ignore me. You know, and I think that's sometimes the thing where people are like, oh, if you're sick, it's like, oh, I don't want to touch you. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't upset you. I don't want to find myself, you know, in a situation where I've upset or said the wrong thing. So it can be, so being sick, there is also, I guess, a level of, I guess, responsibility to other people, especially in your work around you. So to make sure that they kind of feel comfortable negotiating with you on a day-to-day basis, because it's difficult. People don't know how to approach it. I mean, people struggle enough when it's their family members and don't want to say the wrong thing or don't upset you. So, you know, from a work capacity as well, which obviously different social rules apply, it can be difficult. And I do think one of the ways to help is to kind of set out your identity in a way that people can understand it and help you, and you can help them.
I feel like this conversation could go on forever. And it has been such a privilege to chat with you about something that's so near and dear to you both. But I have one last question for you before we part ways. We talked about the people that are around you. Of course, you have your family members, your loved ones, your friends, but we also talked about who you are as a professional. And so this question is related to organizations and your fellow team members. What are some things that you would suggest that these individuals do, these companies do, for their team members that may be dealing with some type of illness, may be dealing with some type of condition in some way, shape, or form? And I recognize that this is different for every person, but Deborah, when you and I were just first chatting about this, we talked about how this can be very taboo at times, this topic. So how do we start to peel back those layers? What would you suggest just in your experiences thus far?
Thankfully, I've only really got Arcadia to as a reference point, and Arcadia, I think, has done an amazing job. And I'm eternally grateful for the way that Arcadia stepped up and made it possible for me to be open and honest. Andrew Hughes Hallett and I were talking not that long ago, and he said, we're laying the track and then we're riding the train on it. We were making it up as we go along. I mean, Arcadia didn't have a long-term sickness policy when I told him that I was sick. And, equally, I didn't have any reference points as to how much is it appropriate to share. And my sister kept saying to me, it was like Arcadia was an extension of my family. As soon as I got news from a consultant, Andrew, who was my point of contact, and he made it very clear from the outset, he would be my main point of contact when I rang him and told him I'd had that call from the GP. And so I felt, for me, it was really important that I was open and honest with him about every stage of my illness, because I felt that it was appropriate for the business to be able to prepare for my absences or difficulties I might have in showing up and doing things. I mean, they cleared my diary. This happened in August 2021. My diary that was full as a deliverer, our busiest period is September to December. At this stage, I was going to have surgery and chemo and be done by Christmas. They cleared my diary overnight. That was a big decision. It was a huge relief to me, because then I didn't need to worry about the next appointment that was going in my diary and thinking, God, how am I going to do that? And so that was great. And then throughout, I gave Andrew every bit of detail that I was struggling with, the uncertainties I was dealing with, so that we could negotiate between us. So how is this going to look from a business point of view? But we never lost the thread of human connection. And I share my joys and I've shared my downtimes with Andrew. And I think that that has made me a better employee. It's made me an extraordinarily grateful employee, not just to the leadership at Arcadia, but to my colleagues who have also made allowances for the changes and shifts in my availability, you know, my wellness, my not so wellness. That has meant that I have been able to sustain the non-sick Deborah, the healthy one, for as long as possible. And I love that. So what's the answer? Stay connected on a human level. Do what you can do to keep the processes in place, because that certainty is also important at a time when you're feeling really uncertain. So knowing, will I get sick pay? How long for? What happens at the end of that? Those kinds of things. Even if it's not what you want to hear, you know, there's going to come a time when we're going to have to pull the plug on that, but at least I know. So now I can deal with that and think, okay, so what's my alternative? What do I need to do? So I think that's really important. There was one time when I felt unsupported, and that's not bad in 2 years. And that was this period that I talked about when I had those 5 weeks of an identity crisis, when I was no longer doing my current job, and while we were still navigating what was my new job going to be. And at that point, I think I needed an independent person who I felt cared about me. Because when you're working virtually and nobody knows day to day how you're doing. And there were days when I thought I could be dying and no one would even know. You know, when you're feeling at your worst, it's like, who am I meant to pick the phone up to and tell them that I'm not going to be in today? Do they even care? Of course they do care. But, you know, in those moments of self-wallow, you're kind of thinking, I could be dead or dying right now. So I think it's really important to have, you know, who are the points of contact? What are the appropriate boundaries? What are the things that we can definitely put in place that are processes and certainties in a period of great uncertainty? And just thank you for the flexibility.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I don't really have much I can't really, as further an answer, Deborah. That was pretty much everything I would probably add to it. I do think that connection is really important, and it's that balance, isn't it, between the human you and the professional you, and you've got to try and keep both those things going to the extent that you can. But also it's about accepting your limitations, and I think that was, you know, for me, I had to step back. I don't do as much delivery as Deborah does, obviously. My role is slightly different, but you know, I did have to take a decision to step back and kind of clear my diary, and part of me didn't want to do it, and I thought, well, no, I'll be fine to do that by then. And you know, then the weeks roll on and you're not feeling any better, and then you inevitably have to kind of cancel. And then, you know, our project management team, who are brilliant, by the way, so little shout out to Jennifer, Cheney, Imran, April, Elsie, you know, at quickly, you know, finding alternatives. But you know, again, it can create more work for other people if you don't. There has to be a level of acceptance, and you know, you have to know your limitations and know what's realistic in terms of what you can do. You know, there's no point signing yourself up, or you know, as a cash writing checks your body can't cash. You know, and you want to be ambitious, you want to be fine, and then you find out nearer the time that you're not, and that does create, you know, disruption and kind of chaos for everyone else. So I think, you know, but you got to balance these two things of wanting to have some certainty around it, and obviously still feel that you've got that ambition, and you're still kind of aiming at something. And I think, you know, a good company can help you achieve both of those things, so they can kind of temper that, sometimes that irrational desire to kind of overdo it and take on too much, with the desire that they know you still want to be adding value. And you know, when you're already feeling demoralized through your health, you know, you don't want your company to demoralize you by telling you, you know, back to what I said earlier, you can't, or no, you're not allowed to do that, you're not well enough. But in some cases, that is the responsible advice to give. So it's always this balance, you know, between sustaining the identity of who you were and who you ideally want to be, the ideal version of yourself, versus this kind of sick shadow that also coexists, and it's managing those two things. And I think you have to do that within yourself to the extent that you can. And then also, you know, when you have a support network around you that kind of gets that too. I think that really helped. And I do think Arcadia, certainly in my experience, they do get that. And again, back to the gratitude thing, that's not something I necessarily take for granted. I think, you know, these kind of the balance of the two I mean, for a lot of people, they're probably thinking, what, you know, until you're actually in that situation, it's quite hard to understand what that feels like. So it's not something we can take for granted, and it's not a easy path to navigate. So I guess on that final point, I suppose would be, you know, people will make mistakes probably at your work. You will probably make mistakes, but that's all fine. You know, we learn and we move forward, and you know, we don't hold any resentment or any grudges, because we're all kind of figuring this out together, aren't we? I suppose a lot of the time we're working through it, and you know, to your analogy, we're building the track as the train hurtles along it.
Amen to that. And I want to thank you both for, again, just being as transparent as you have been and as open as you have been in sharing today. And it has been an absolute privilege to be a part of this conversation. So thank you for that. And for those of you who may be listening or watching, we want to thank you for joining in on this very important conversation. And as Matt and Deborah both mentioned, you know, this is going to be an imperfect journey for all involved. But let's start with human. Let's start with connection. And thank you for listening and joining us for this episode of The Mindset Advantage. Have a good one.